G'day guys, Weirman here, welcome back to the workshop. I'm on my own again today. It's Saturday and it's just after lunchtime, and I thought, you know what, I've had a good morning. I had coffee and cold pizza for breakfast, and I'm a grown-up, so there's not a damn thing you can do to stop me. I got a bottle of water and I thought, let's record some stuff. What I'm going to try and do at this point is hopefully it'll cover two things. I did say that I was going to cover some missions, like complexity-wise. And there's somebody also asked for some scenarios for scouting, and coincidentally I was going to do these with a scouting type thing in mind, so let's combine those two. I'm going to need that water because this is going to be a long one. I'll actually probably split it into a couple, but we'll see how we go. So, complexity. Now, I'm going to have to try and refer to it as complexity because what happens is I have a tendency to overthink stuff. I have a tendency to overcomplicate stuff, especially my scenarios. And complication has a little bit of a negative connotation, but I need that in my head because I have to stop myself from overcomplicating things. You can ask Adam, he's sat and listened to me try to explain scenarios to him before, and I'm sure he's had a hard time with at least some of them. So, if I say complication rather than complexity or challenge or difficulty curve or something like that, then just accept that there's no negativity assigned to that. Don't think, oh, if I make it more complex, people are gonna get upset. You just have to find your group's level, right? If you've got a group of people who are into having a couple of social drinks and a bowl of snacks and some dinner halfway through and just rolling some dice and having some fun, then, you don't need to be too complex for that. If you've got a bunch of accountants who enjoy like list taking and record keeping and all that sort of stuff, then you can go ham. But your best bet is to just increment up slowly if you can, right? Find little things that you can add in there and just kind of slowly increment the complexity, the difficulty, the challenge rating of your scenarios that you're creating, because you can always drop it back a little bit. But if you make your stuff like super duper complex on the first go, it's possible you're going to turn people off and they're just not going to want to play the next one. Okay, so incrementing a little bit at a time. So, you enjoyed that. Yeah, what about if we do this sort of thing? Right? That's a good way to go. For me, anyway. I don't know. But let's look at scouting and let's say, okay, let's boil this down. Let's bring it right down to the lowest common denominator, the smallest indivisible particle, the essence of what I'm trying to get at, right? Now, I'm going to give you a little narrative through line here, I'm giving it to you so I can try and keep everything straight and try and show you how I'm doing this. This is not the only way to do this. This is not the only thing that you can do, right? My process here is my process. How you do it is yours. Like, I think this was Mikey, but it could have been somebody else. Give me a shout in the comments if it was you, saying that they approach it like a scattergun type thing, to just throw a whole bunch of ideas out there and see what happens. That's really cool. I like that. If you all sit in a group and you just go, okay, idea storm, even if there's some like shyer people, or if you've got people who tend to criticize a little bit and some people can't take that, have people write it down, right? Have people type out a little thing on a thing and then email it to one person. And then that one person strip all the actual identifying marks out and put it on a sheet. Print the sheet out and bring the sheet in and have everybody look at it, right? Have a whole bunch of ideas and people go, I like that, right? That is how you get your group involved in it, right? But let's boil this down. So the narrative that I'm looking at for all of these, and I'm going to increase the difficulty, the challenge, the complexity, the complication. I'm going to increase them as we go. But the narrative that I'm looking at is, let's say you're a defensive force. You're either a faction defensive line, or you're some sort of fortress, or you're a group, a force in a dropship that's just landed, and you're making developing a beachhead, right? And you're waiting on the next. You're trying to make an area safe, and you're waiting on the next group, right? So you're a defensive force of some description, and you have an assault force coming at you, right? For whatever reason, for whatever contrived reason. I mean, in game you'd have satellites and things. So if you have people that get picky about this sort of thing, you're going to have to find a reason why none of this works. Electromagnetic interference is always a good one. Just say, well, EMI, can't do it. Sorry, buddy. Right, but your satellites and recon planes, drones, that sort of stuff, they're not really working. Your normal data gathering channels are not operating properly. Your only option is to send a force out there and get visual confirmation of this assault force, right? You have to send scouts. Okay, along the way, those scouts meet up with a skirmishing unit, an outrider unit, something that's been specifically sent out in order to catch the scouts before they get to the main force, right? Okay, so let's boil this down to what I think, right? In this particular instance, I would say you're looking at point capture in the abstract, right? As an abstract concept, you've got point capture, you've got demolition, you've got item retrieval, you've got breakthrough, you've got that sort of thing, right? I think in this particular instance, my abstract, my boiled down, my very minimum, my indivisible end is a point capture. And it would be the scout force gets, say, a couple of light mechs, like a locust and a wasp or a stinger, one of those, something maneuverable, something fast, and then something maneuverable. You could give them two stingers, or a stinger and a wasp. Those guys are 696s, I'm pretty sure. And then the defensive force, the assault guys, the outriders, get, say, a wolverine, a griffin, a hunchback, something bigger than the others that has some solid damage output, but that is less fast and less maneuverable than them. Griffin would be pushing your luck, but it would definitely be like one that you could use. I mean, they're 5.8, yeah, they're 5.85s, whereas stingers and wasps are 6.96s, and the locust is an 8.12. So, yeah. But you'd have that. So you'd give your scouts a couple of light, fast, maneuverable units, and you'd give your assault force, your outrider force, one medium, possibly heavy unit, right? Then you would say, okay, the scout's mission is to get to a point. And you'd pick a point or an area on the map, and you'd say, okay, there it is. Right now, bear in mind with the standard map sheet, you've got 17 by 15. If you pick an area, which I would thoroughly recommend because that gets you that stops the cheese. Because if you think about it, if you pick a single hex where they're going to spot this enemy force from, then the opponent can just stand their one unit on that hex, and then you can't get there. Right, you have to bring that unit down in order to do anything, which is a bit cheesy. So pick an area, which is basically just 7 hexes towards one end of the map. Right? And the scout's only mission is to get a unit into that area. That's it. Do that, win. Right? The defender, the Assault Force Outriders, their only mission is to stop those light mechs getting to that point. They don't want them to get eyes on the Assault Force. They don't want them to get the information back to the defenders. And that's it. You stop them, you win. They get there, they win. Do I think that's a good one to play? I don't know. I think veteran players would look down on that. But I think if you're taking beginning players on a mission, like if this is your first ever mission in BattleTech, that would be fine. Right, that's fine. It will teach you about weapon selection, heat management. It'll teach you about maneuvering, target numbers, all of that sort of stuff, and it'll be over fairly quickly. Right, it's a few turns for you to get up to where you need to be, a few turns where the enemy is able to try and take you out, and then you'll either win or you'll lose, right? And I would thoroughly recommend, if you are playing with new players and you do use something like this, let them swap afterwards. Okay, don't be mean and make one person do the whole thing the whole time, right? Swap them over and let them see it from the other side. Okay? But that is the essential, right? Like I say, I don't think that's a very good mission, but for beginner players it's more than adequate. Simple ways to increase the complexity in that would be to put more points in, so you could have multiple points. You could let people pick their own units. Now, that doesn't sound too complex to veteran players, but for new beginner players to BattleTech, picking your units is one of the big things that you have to get used to, right? It is one of the big things that you have to get into your head and past in order to be able to play the game properly, right? So, I mean, there's a solid case for this sort of simple mission to be the thing that you use. You say, okay, you've got 2000 BV, you have to get a unit from here to there. Go pick your forces. You've got 2000 BV, you have to stop them doing what I just said. Go pick your forces, right? And you can, as a games master or someone who's teaching people, you can oversee them. You can say, okay, there's, this, that. You can watch the scouts pick their scouts and say, are you really sure that's a good idea? Or, field questions and things like that, right? But this is a simple, easy mission that you can overwatch these people doing their first ever force selection. And I don't see any reason why that couldn't be a good way to do it. I don't know. I think that's, like I say, I wouldn't play that because I prefer a bit more to my missions. But if I had a couple of brand new players, I would 100% put that in there. Another few easy ways to increase the complexity of that base level thing. What did I say? I said force selection and multiple points. You could have it be more along the lines of a breakthrough thing. So scouting and breakthrough could be fairly similar. I mean, your scout mission might be to get off the board, and technically that's a breakthrough, but for me, scout missions are more about information gathering, and a breakthrough is kind of more involved in combat. Scout missions for me are never about... They will involve combat. You will almost always devolve to combat, but they are not about combat. And I think it was Bregel a while ago mentioned that you wanted to introduce people to things and show them that it isn't just combat. And a scout mission is a good one, because for me, scout missions are more about the information. Like I say, for that base level thing, you don't ever have to involve combat. The only person who's trying to actually do any damage is the defender, the one that's trying to bring those scouts down. The scout is focused on getting that information and getting it back to their base. You could also look on it as an item retrieval if you wanted to. Say, well, there's some sort of communications satellite that's downed and you've got to go and pick up a black box or something along those sort of lines. So you could see a scout mission as that if you were so inclined to. But yeah. Other simple ways to increase that base level mission's complexity would be to introduce a time limit. Time limit, some sort of skill check when you get to that area, right? So you've got an area that you have to get to, And in the first initial thing, it's just get a unit there, you win, boom. But now you have to get a unit there and make some sort of PSR with, and I thoroughly recommend PSRs for this, piloting skill rolls for this. You have to make a PSR with modifiers for how fast you are moving and whether or not you've been shot, sensor damage, that sort of stuff, right? That adds that little extra tweak of will they make this roll, and that gives the defender time to bring them down before they can make that roll, right? But let's look at something a bit more up, a bit further up, right? So, I mean, I've got a few ideas on, and I've had a couple of good ones. I want to do one with some, like, going through the motions as I do it sort of thing. So we'll do that one as a separate thing. And I've got one that's like, I just went bananas and went super complex, and I've still got stuff that I'm trying to figure out how to write down, and I've got a few that I've written down, but that's, yeah, it all depends on how far we go along with this. But let's look at a different one. Let's say you've got your assault force split into 3 elements, 3 different sections. So one's going forward to flank that side, one's going forward to flank that side, and one's coming right down the middle. That's the basic sort of thing, but that could be, for any reason, you could be splitting them into 3 things. Your basic scouting has given you the idea that there's a point where they're moving towards that they're going to kind of veer off so far that you're not going to be able to see them with a single force, with single scout units, right? So let's say you've got a time limit, but each element of this assault force is moving at a different speed, okay? So you've got different time limits for each element, and you could just call them 1, 2, and 3, A, B, and C. You can call them whatever you want. Fruit Loops, Alphabet, and Squiggle, right? It doesn't matter. 1, 2, and 3. Now, if you've got standard maps, you've got 15 hexes across by 17 hexes high. I've got one of the clan ones here. You could very easily split that into 3 sections of varying sizes and have like one side, the opponent's side, be split into 3 hex groups, right? So if you have a line from, say, from the edge going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. So you split that into 5. So there's 3 5-hex lines, and then bring them, say, 5 hexes down in as well. Now, to see the units in element 1, you have to be in that first 5x5 section of the end of the map. You see what I mean? For the second element, you have to be in that middle section of 5x5, right? And for the third element, you have to be in that right-hand side section of 5x5, okay? Now, let's say for element 1, they're slightly faster. They're moving at a reasonable speed. So you've only got 6 turns to get a unit into that first section, make a PSR with a modifier for how fast you are moving. So your TMM, right? So if you go really fast, you can't focus your cameras and things properly, right? It's not about what type of movement you used. It's about how fast you're going, right? So your TMM gets applied to this. And then if you've taken like any other piloting skill check, which will jostle you around, make it harder for you to do things, then you also get a +1, right? You have to get there, and you have to make that PSR with at least one of your units within 6 turns. If you can do that, you've scanned the first element, right? We're still trying to keep this fairly simple, so I'm trying desperately not to overcomplicate this, but let's say There, right? You get one of your scouts into that area within 6 turns, make a PSR modified for how fast you moved and whether or not you'd had to make any other piloting skill checks in that turn. If you can do that, you've scouted that one. Then you have to do Unit 2, Element 2 you have to do before you get to 8 turns, and Element 3 you have to get before you do, say, 9 turns. Right? Those two are moving at roughly the same speed. Right? And that's it. And you can have that map be as big or as small as you want, and you can increase or decrease your time limit for those element scans as much or as little as you want. Right? You can change that up however you want to. I mean, simple ways to modify the complexity for that would be to adjust the piloting skill check so you could have modifiers for all sorts of things, the type of movement they used, as well as the distance they moved. Excuse me, hiccups. You could have extra like distance. So you've got the long side of the map is 17, the short side of the map is 15. So if you put two of them long side to long side, you've got something that is 30 across and 17 long. If you then take a section at one far end of that 30 hexes and say that's element 1, and put one roughly in the middle of those 30 hexes and say that's element 2, and one right at the right hand side of those 30 hexes and say that's element 3, and then keep the same time limits, you have to seriously split your units up. That will make it more difficult. You're increasing the challenge. You're saying, okay, you have to do this a hell of a lot faster and with a bit more coordination than you did when you're only on one map sheet. When you're only on one map sheet, you can cover it as like in no time. Theoretically, if you're allowing vehicles and things, you can do that in one turn. If I've got 3 light VTOLs and I can keep them roughly alive in that time, then I've beat it in one turn. Boom, done. Right? So it's hard to talk about just one aspect of scenario building for me, because like I say, it tends to complicate. I tend to complicate things, and you need to be aware of how your force building section impacts the rest of your scenario. If you're allowing people to take whatever they want for a certain BV, then you are going to have to deal with the fact that you can have a helicopter that moves at, what, like 15? What's the, you've got Mega Mech Lab up, Tarron, just look it up. Jesus. What am I thinking of? What's the one? A Warrior. Warrior attack helicopter. Introductory box. Let's look at the 7. So the 7 is only 295 BV. Right? And it's a 914. Right? So I can be almost... Well, if we make it 5x5, I can be in that hex in the end. So I can come on from here. I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 at a reasonable height. So if I have my... I'm looking at one of the clan... What am I looking at? Barrenlands number 2. And the highest level is 5. But I can cover the map without going above level 3, basically. So I could advance on from my edge at between level 3 and level 6, and I'd be able to just do one move. I'd be able to take multiple of these at minimum of 3, and I'd be able to take probably 6 for the same amount of BV that you're giving to the other person. I mean, I can just drive them all, fly them right up to the end. Each one of them attempts that piloting skill check in the end phase, and as long as one of them is alive and makes that check, I've won on the first turn. right? So, and this is why I get so complicated with my missions, right? I can see where the cheese come from. I can see those little gaming the system moments, and I go, oh, how do I stop them doing this? And then I introduce a little rule, right? And then I see another one, and I introduce another little rule, and I see another one, and I introduce another little rule. And it just gets stupid after a while, right? So you have to accept that somewhere along the line, your scenario is going to be gamed. Someone's going to go, well, if I take this and I give it that and I do this with it, then I win, right? Now, if you're a good gamer, if you're getting a scenario from someone and you're a reasonable person, you will go, if I take half a dozen, he's given me 2,000 BV, I can take nearly 10 of these things for that. They'll all be basic skill, but one of them's going to make the chill. I'm going to go talk to him about that, right? Right? Or she's got this thing that like, if I take an assault mech, I can just stomp up there. I better go talk to her about that, right? If you see these things in the scenarios and you know your scenario maker is doing their best, but is maybe a little new at it, or maybe hasn't spotted that, go and have a talk to them. You don't have to talk to them in front of anybody. Just go, look, I spotted this, and if I do this and take that and do this with it, I'm going to win on the first turn. And they'll go, holy crap, I did not see that. Thank you. Would you mind not doing that? And I'll kind of put a little addendum out, and, we can kind of just brush over this ever happening. Or they'll go, yeah, actually that works. I mean, if you want to, go for it. And then next time they'll know, and they'll stop you from using the cheat. See, that's what I mean. I get into this headspace, and I'm like, I can see where you could, but you could do that. That would work against, no. And that's one of the reasons why it takes me so long to bring out a scenario when Adam and I are playing. It's just because I can tell where the BS is going to happen, and I'm trying to stop it. Anyway, lovely tangent, Tarron. Where were you? Oh, the 3 elements. Yeah, so that's one that you could try doing. Another one that's kind of on that level of complexity. So we're not trying to get too heavy duty here on the whole complexity thing. If you've got something like the standard map sheets, like I say, if you put 2 longside to longside, then you've got 30 hexes across. Now, if you start your units, imagine that as a rectangle, right? So it's a rectangle, it's 30 hexes along the long side, and it's 15 hexes along the short side. Label the top long side 1, the right hand side is 2, the bottom one facing towards you, you're the scout, the one facing towards you is 3, and then the one off your left is 4. So you deploy on 3, the one near you, and you could put your enemy, your opponent, as on, like, coming on from either, what would that be, 2 or 4, right? I better write them in, or I'm going to forget. Right, so you've got that rectangle, which is 30 across number 1, 15 down number 2, 30 across number 3, and then 15 along number 4. You're setting up on number 3, and if you set your opponent up on 2 and 4, or one or the other, then you can have the actual mission, the objective, the location that you need to be at on number 1, opposite you, across 30 hexes. And now what you can do is you can have it be an area with a single central point, right? So if you have a single radius, like I think they call it this 2x radius, because your start of your radius would be in the center of the hex, and that is technically 2 hexes. So it would be the center hex and the surrounding hexes, so that's 7. If you make it 3, then it's 19 hexes, so it's the single center hex, then 7, and then 12, around that, right? But what you do is you put that center hex at the corner of whichever side your opponent is coming in, right? You put it on that corner hex, and then you move it along. And you have to be in that area, right? So it'll only be a half area. It'll be center hex, and then 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it'll be 11 hexes. And that will slowly move across the board to represent the fact that the enemy force is moving across the board. They're moving to somewhere. They're trying to get to the defenders. They're trying to move across the board. The outriders are coming with them, and they're specifically there to stop you getting there. So you don't technically have a turn limit anymore, but you can't scout the units from anywhere other than that area. If that area moves off the board, then you don't. If you move it along at 1 hex per turn, then you give the scouts 30 full turns in order to, basically 30 turns to get to that area, right? I'd call this one a reasonable size thing, so you'd probably want to be tweaking your force building section. You could maybe say, okay, keep the scouts to actual scouts, so they actually have to be labelled as a scout, or they have to be just a certain size, so they maybe don't have them be over 50 tons or 45 tons, something like that. Hiccups again, damn it. So yeah, and then force the opponent to take something between, say, 45 and 60, something like that. So they'd have to, you could maybe make them take strikers, skirmishers, make them make a cavalry lance or a striking lance, something like that, right? Put more emphasis on your force building restrictions and try and make this one a bit different. Yeah, so then you have to get scouts into that area, you have to make some sort of PSR, and you have to say, do that with at least 3 units. Make that, like, pass that skill check with at least 3 units. That could be a way to do it. You could also use margin of success and margin of failure. I'm going to do that in some of the more complex ones, so it might be an idea to introduce that here. So what you can do is say, okay, you need to get 10 points of information on this force. Get one of your scout units into that area, make a piling skill check with modifiers for what type of movement you used, damage to sensors, pilot, that sort of thing, whether you've attacked, what level you are, maybe. You might have better vision from higher elevations, right? So you could introduce a modifier based on the height they are above 0. So you'd get -1 per level you are above, right? So introduce that, and then you make that piling skill check with all of those modifiers, and then you get a number of points towards your total equal to your margin of success. If you want to be that guy, you could say you also get a minus for margin of failure, right? So you're trying to accumulate a certain number of points. Call it 10. It can be any arbitrary number you feel like, but you're trying to accumulate a number of points of information. He said, making clearly audible air quotes. So you're trying to accumulate a certain number of points of information on that force, right? Move your scout into that moving area of sight, right? So they're moving along the thing, you need to get into that area. Make your piling skill check. If you pass it, you get a number of points towards your total equal to your margin of success. If you fail it, you take a number of points away from your total equal to your margin of failure. You have to do this to accumulate a certain amount. Once you've accumulated that amount, you win. You could also say that you then have to get a unit off the board again and get them away from whatever interference it is that's stopping your normal data gathering from working in this area. Get them away from that, and then they can upload that data and they can send it back to base, right? Those are some over complications. I'm doing it again, damn it. But you get the gist, hopefully, right? So you instead of having that 30 turns, you could also say you roll a dice. You could say, you could actually go into what the enemy force is made up of, give it an actual like force list, and have the assault force built by the person who's running it, and say, okay, well, tell me what you're taking, tell me your highest weight, your lowest weight, tell me your highest speed, your lowest speed, tell me how many of your units have jump, blah, 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 and then you use their lowest speed, and you say, okay, well, that's as fast as they can go. So it's going to move X number of hexes per turn, right? And that, I mean, if you've got all assault mechs in your assault force, then they're probably only going to move between 3 and 6 hexes per turn, right? You could roll dice and say, okay, well, 2d6 minus 2 or something, and that's how far they go forward, or something like that. I don't know. You could come up with some sort of random move to simulate the fact that this force is, they're going around forests, they're going over hills, they're doing that sort of thing. It's not necessarily just 1 hex per turn, right? Yeah, that one got a bit complex. It was such a simple little note there as well, and I just destroyed it. Oh my god. What's another way you could do this? I've got 2 that I kind of want to go over in a bit more depth, and I think maybe I should do them as separate things, but I don't know, maybe we should do what's the time on this thing? 37 minutes. Maybe we can do one more, the super complex one, or the mainly complex one. Alright, let's do it. I'm going to turn to another page. Oh, I did have a page marked where I had a blank page. There we go, right. So I've got a page here, I've got a pen. Alright, so what I've got for one of my higher level complexity ones would be something similar to what I just described, right? Very similar to that. So you would have a moving area that you can get information from. But I'm going to introduce a scanning mechanic with the margin of success, margin of failure, that type of thing. So, and this is a pretty good one to use for a starting point for more scenarios. So if you're linking your scenarios, which you can do, what was it, Chaos Campaign thing in the Campaign Ops thing, I think, gives you some idea of how to link them. But basically you just have to try and figure out how to have the stuff that happens in one scenario affect what happens in the next scenario or the scenario after, right? You do that and you can have it all linked up. I'll try and go into that at some point, because that is actually really, really cool. But these scout scenarios are prime material for that. They're really good for linking to the next thing. So that assault force is an actual assault force. Let's pretend it's an actual assault force. These scouts are ones that are part of your actual force of defenders, and you've had to send them out to encounter these guys and try and get information. The better you do, the more information you've got for your defenders, the better you can set it up. If you know they've got all assault mechs, or you know everything's 80 tons or higher, then you can set your minefields to 100 tons, right? Stuff like that, right? So what was the main one I was going to do? Oh yeah, so if you've got your scouts, you set up your scouts, and you've got an outrider force that comes in, and they're going to move on, and the moving area is going to move on with them. So they all move on as like initiative values. You'd assign a movement speed to the enemy's assault force that's off the board. I would have the 3 elements thing again, so put 3 separate elements of them, and give them each a different speed if you wanted to, but they're all visible from that area. You could technically have 3 separate points that can move forward and behind each other. So point A would be element 1, point B would be element 2, blah, 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 right? So if one of those elements is made up of units that are faster than the others, it will slowly pull ahead, and you'll have to branch your scouts off and try and get to those units first, right? So that element will have a shorter time frame for you to get a scout in there and do the things that you're going to do. Now, it will also have the same scanning mechanic as I said in that last one. So you're doing a piloting skill check with mods for your speed. Sorry, I'm writing this down as I go so I don't forget what I said. This is why I was calling it the Notebook series, because this is all been in my head for like months. Damn hiccups. Every time. So, mods for your speed, whether you've taken sensor damage, whether you've got something like a Beagle Active Probe, a C3 unit, and this is one that goes back to like the lowest level complexity. Give any sort of checks, any sort of PSRs that you're making in your scouting games, give people a benefit for taking this sort of electronica. Things like Beagle probes and C3 units and what's the other one that's there? The combined one. What is it? CEWS, I think it is. Any of those sort of electronica are... This is the sort of scenario where those are allowed to shine, right? These are the sort of things that let you use that equipment for its purpose, right? So give them a modifier, give them a bonus if they've got that sort of stuff, because that encourages your scout player to take the units that have them, right? So modifier for electronica, whether you've taken damage, whether you've been in a fight, so if you've been shooting that round. And I would say these piloting skill checks should be made in the end phase. And this is something that you're going to be looking at when you're making your scenarios, is timing, right? Because you're in a turn-based game and real life is not turn-based, you are going to face problems with things that you're trying to do that aren't really sensible and have to do with timing. Where in the turn you put these things matters, right? What point of the turn you make people make these checks and give them the points, and like all of those sort of things, it matters. Even in where in the phase you make them do it can matter, because technically in the end phase, I think, is when you're supposed to be checking for consciousness. So do you let them make the piling skill check to see whether they've scanned things first, or do you make them do it after they've checked to see if they're conscious? I mean, obviously I would say afterwards, but that is a personal thing. It's up to you where you put it, right? It's up to you at what point in the phase, at what point in the turn you make them do the check. Once they've done this check, they're getting points one way or the other. So you need to, be sure. Now, I would have the same margin of success, margin of failure thing happen here. So your moss or moth is a plus or a minus to your overall total. Each element that is there needs to be scanned to a certain total, right? You need to get, say, 5 points for each one, 10 points for each one, 20 points for each one. It depends on how difficult you want to make this, on how challenging you want it to be. Bear in mind, the cheese here is to just take better pilots. Okay, if I take a 2-0 pilot, I'm going to get a way bigger margin of success. If I can jump, say, a wraith in there, or a wasp or a stinger, I mean, I could bring up master unit list and see what a 0-0 stinger is, but I'm pretty sure I can get one for under 1,000. So that's going to be your cheese. That's going to be your problem. But I think it's actually, in this case, I don't see it as much of a problem, because you're going to be spending BV to do that. And as has been pointed out, there is a lot of problem with putting all your BV into your skills. You are reducing the number of units you're going to have. You're going to have action economy on the opponent's side, right? But if you can get enough units to keep your action economy on par, then, you're doing all right. And again, this will come down in part to what sort of force building restrictions you place on both sides. If you tell the outriders, the defenders in this case, the people who have the assault force on the other side of the map there, who are coming on and trying to stop these scouts, if you tell them they're only allowed to take one lance of units, max, and give them, say, 4,000 BV to do it, right? And you give the scouts unlimited units, but they're only allowed to take scouts, and they've got, say, the same 4,000 BV, there's going to be a lot more of them than there are of the defenders, right? But they're going to be very, very squishy. Or there'll be only slightly more of them, but they'll be better skilled, right? So, again, it's entirely up to you how you do this. I don't think I'm really helping much here, am I? I don't know. Jeez Louise. All right, let's say a wasp. That's a 696, right? I can put a 0-0 pilot in there for 929 BV. I can put a 2-0, and bear in mind, house rules are going to impact this as well, right? Okay, so 2-0, if you're looking at rule of 2, then 2-0 is the best piloting skill you can get with the least BV, right? It goes from 929 for a 0-0 to 741, so you're saving a couple of hundred points there, right? So 741, I can have a 2-0 wasp, 4,000 BV, holy crap. 5 and a bit. So I can get a little over a lance of those, which as I've said, that puts the action economy roughly even, actually, because those wasps are not going to be doing very much damage to a full lance of medium mechs, or even a lance of mixed light and medium mechs, right? They're not going to be doing a lot of damage, but they're a 696 and they're going to be moving really, really fast, and they're going to be getting those piloting skill checks done really, really, really easily. So, I don't know. It's up to you guys. Like I say, if you're not excluding vehicles, then the warrior could come in, and he's only 295 BV for the base level, and that's a 914 move. So, SRM4 and an Act 2, he's got better weapons than a Wasp as well. Anyway, sidetracking myself. Point is, force building will play into your scenarios. So let's go back to this. So you've got those three elements. You need, let's call it 15 points. Some arbitrary number that I've pulled out of my bottom, 15 points. So you're going to have to get to each of those areas that are moving in a separate speed each. So you'll have 3 tokens that you put on the map labeled 1, 2, and 3. For element 1, 2, and 3, you'll work out what your average speed for those elements is, and you'll move them across the board at roughly that speed. Or you can give them a single speed each. You could say, okay, this one, like an arbitrary number, if you don't want to work anything out, or you could make each one move randomly, or you could move just 1 point across and say, you can see all 3 elements from here, right? Up to you how you do it. But you have to accumulate 15 points on each element, right? And if you can do that, then you get a win. The other thing that you need to watch when you're doing scenarios is whether you use a win-loss condition, a single win-loss condition. It doesn't have to be a single win-loss condition. It's not a single thing that wins you the game. So this is, you get 15 points on all 3 of those elements and you win, right? It's not a single condition. You have to do all 3 of them, but if you do those steps in that order, you win, right? Or you could say, okay, you get victory points based on how many you can get scans on, or how well you scan each one. So if you can get at least 5 points on one, you get 5 information on one, you get, say, a victory point. The enemy will get victory points based on how many of you it can take down, and on how many information points it stops you gathering, if you see what I mean. Right, so if you've got a total of 15 for each one that you're allowed to gather, and you only get 5 on one of them, then they get points for the 10 that you haven't gathered. Do you see what I mean? So you could call that victory points and say, well, for each margin of success that goes up, you're gathering victory points for that. And each victory point that you gather is a victory point you're taking away from the opponent, right? You could do that. You could also link that to your next mission, right? So you have those 3 elements be actual forces that you're going to fight actual battles with in some future thing. And you say, okay, you don't know what these forces are. If you can gather at least 5 points of information about an element, I will tell you, as the games master, or the scenario builder, I will allow you to have a list of what's in element 1 by weight. Right, so I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you whether it's a mech or a vehicle, and I'm going to give you its weight, or its weight class. Ooh, that works better. Right, I'm going to give you its weight class. So you'll know that element 1, you get to 5 points on element 1, and you'll know that it consists of 2 lances of assault units, and 3 of them are vehicles, and the other 5 are mechs. That's the information you managed to gather. If you can get to 10 points of information on that element 1, I'll let you know what they are. So you'll know it's like demolishers and awesomes and all that sort of, right? You'll know what those forces are made up of. I won't give you the specifics, right? You don't get the specifics, but you get to know what it is. So you'll know it's an awesome. You know what version of awesome it is. You won't know if it's an 8Q or a 9Q or a 9M or a 9Q, right? You don't know those. But you know it's an awesome. You know there's 2 awesomes, 4 battle masters, and 6 atlases coming at you. If you get all 15, then basically you get to sit with a notepad and the enemy's force list before you get your defenses up and running, right? Which is a huge advantage, right? Huge advantage. And that's the kind of thing that you can do with these sort of scouting missions, right? The other thing that I thought to put in this one is not just scanning the elements of the far off force, but also scanning the units that are in the area there, the outriders that are trying to stop you, right? So you could have it be that instead of trying to bring those units down, you're trying to scan them. You're trying to get information on those units. And you can also put in the fact that you could have some sort of artillery piece available, and if you can tag one of them, you can bring the artillery piece down on them, that sort of thing. If you've got artillery in your defensive force, you can use that at this point. You can say, okay, I'm going to spot with this part of my scout force, and I'm going to bring artillery down on these outriders, right? And then you can take that and push it out to the next scenario and say, okay, well, I've got full information on this force. The assault group has had to build their forces. That player has had to build their forces ahead of time. I don't have to build my force, my full force, until I've finished the scout mission. If I can get information on these things, then I can use that information to build my force, okay? I can use that information as or in building my defenses. So I can say, okay, well, I know I'm facing things that are all 80 tons. That the highest unit is 80 tons. So I'm going to equip all of my LRM carriers with 1 ton of vibro bomb thunder ammo and set it to 80 tons because that's the biggest unit that's coming, and those are going to go and they're going to be launched, they're going to be there, ready to go. I'm going to set all of my previous things to vibro bombs, 80 tons, right? I know there's a lot of jump units in one of the elements, so I'm going to set up some, what are those ones? The ones that sense jumping units. Damn, active. That's it, active. So I'm going to have a lot of active minefields. I know there's a lot of very, very slow units, so I'm going to have a lot of long-range attack capability on my turrets that I put on my wall. I'm going to have a thick wall with turrets on the top, and I'm going to say, okay, that's my defensive position, and I'm going to adjust my turrets to have a lot of long-range capability, because I know there's going to be a lot of very, very slow units slowly walking towards me, and I want to get as many of these turrets getting as much damage as possible from as long a distance as possible. I want to really hammer holes into the enemy before they can get close enough, right? And like I say, you could extend that to the units. You could even get rid of the off-board ones and just say, well, there's 2 lances of stuff that I have to scan. Anyway, that's kind of the higher level of complexity. Now, I've got an idea for one, but I'm basically at an hour here, so I'm going to stop dribbling. I'm going to have a drink. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go through, and I had another idea for an approach to the force, right? So this force is coming, it's approaching you, it's coming through an area, and I thought, well, what if instead of a scout, we use the scouts as spotters? How do you get your artillery to lock in a position? An artillery-like response to the scenario that I've just set out. How does that sound? Right, okay. in the artillery rules, you're allowed, one of the optional rules is you're allowed up to 5 spots per hex map that you can secretly, if you wish, designate as pre-coordinated, as locked in, right? So there's a pre-programmed sequence that you can say, okay, fire on Alpha 1 and punch it into the artillery computer, and it'll realign the barrel and change the powder and all the other jazz, and it'll do the thing that will get that on target for that hex, right? You don't have to make any rolls, you don't have to do anything, it's just on target. And I thought to myself, well, how would I get them? Right? How do you get those 5 points? And I thought, well, I mean, if there's any people who have actually served in the military and served in an artillery piece command, please, if you have an actual thing, then let me know. But in BattleTech, I thought, well, they'd probably have some cool system with like beacons and electronica and satellite relays and stuff, and the easy, effective way to do it would be electronically. So you'd put like a bunch of beacons down in an area that you wanted to pre-program for your artillery shots. You'd put a dummy round electronically programmed with the weight and flight characteristics of whatever round it is you're trying to do into the artillery piece. You'd connect the two areas. You'd have like engineers and things set all this up on the site, and then the experienced artillery crews at the other end, and they'd be communicating, and then you'd have the beacon and the dummy round communicate with each other, and weather satellites and visual satellites and topography and heat maps and weather and all this stuff. And you'd have it like set a tolerance and just fire the dummy round. It wouldn't actually go anywhere, it would electronically calculate trajectories and things, and then the beacon would light up and it'd put a ping on each of your computers and say, well, you were out by this much, you need to adjust by this sort of thing, right? I don't know, and then you'd basically be able to zero it in that way. That would be how you do it if you wanted to not give away the fact that you've been zeroing artillery in, right? Otherwise you're going to end up with craters everywhere, and people are going to go, well, I don't want to go there, because we didn't do that. But then I thought, well, what if you had to do that on the fly, right? If you had to do that while there's an enemy force coming at you and you're trying to do this, you don't have time for like a couple of hours worth of engineers and transport and that sort of stuff, right? So I thought, well, you could send your scouts out there and have them spot for these things, zero the artillery in that way, like stand on the spot, get a GPS marker, weather, all that sort of stuff, send that back, and then move away, have the artillery shoot and say, okay, correct blah blah degrees in X direction sort of thing. And I thought, well, that's something you could use your scout units for, like a really big map. So what if we make, because your map selection, again, as I've said, the different sections of your scenario all have an impact on how it plays. Your force building section will have an impact on how it plays. I think this one would be really cool if you used like a few maps with their short ends connected. And so they're 17 on the long side and 15 on the short side. If you put even two of them short side together, you'd have 34 hexes long by 15 hexes wide. So you've got like a valley or a narrow gorge or something that's the fastest way to get to you. You know that, the enemy knows that, but you haven't had time to zero your artillery in on that particular position. And so you've sent your scouts out there, one, to get an eye on what's coming, and two, to zero the artillery into that area so you can turn it into a hellscape and make them go the long way, right? And then I thought, well, okay, let's figure that out. Again, I'm not going to go too much into actual forces and force building and all that sort of stuff. I'm just trying to like give you an idea of the sort of things that you can do to modify your complexity. Quite a lot of complexity comes from the special rules that you're going to instigate and the objectives that you try to get. Right, the objectives you put in there and the special rules you have in order for people to achieve those objectives. Let's say you've got scout units, right? I don't know what they're going to be. I don't know how many BV you're going to go with, what sort of units, but you want those scout units to move to a spot. Now, I would suggest that you mark those spots beforehand. So the maps get set up and then the scout will place down tokens in, say, half a dozen different spots. Technically, by the rules, the optional rule, you're allowed 5 per map sheet, which if you go 2 of them end to end, or even 3 of them end to end, is like 5, 10, or 15, right? That seems like a lot to me. I think maybe half a dozen of these is probably plenty. If you have 2 maps and you're only 15 apart, then like 15 wide, then half a dozen spots on those 2 maps is probably pretty good. You can place them wherever you want to place them. Obviously, the closer they are to your deployment zone, the faster you can zero them in. But the further away from you they are, the more effect they're going to have. Because if you put them right at your end, then people are just going to run past them, or you're not going to hit people as they run past it. Right? So you want them spaced out, but you want them out that way. Right? So that's something that the attacker or the scout is going to have to decide on. And it's up to them where they put them. I would say what you would want to do is have the scout have to actually be on the spot. So you mark those out with like a token, a marker, something like that. And then you have to have a unit in that hex. And then they can make a piloting skill roll. So you don't have to stop in the hex, but you would modify it for things like your movement speed or type, possibly both. If you've had to make any other sort of piloting skill rolls, I think I mentioned this in the last one. If you've had to make other piloting skill checks, you're already like your hands can only do so much in 10 seconds, right? So if you're making other piloting skill checks during that turn, it might be worth, like if you have to see if you trip over or if you get across rubble or something like that, it might be worth adding a modifier to this PSR. You could also modify it for things like if you attack during a turn, or if you are attacked during a turn, and if your pilot has taken any damage, or if your sensors and equipment have taken any damage. You could, I don't know, probably come up with some other modifiers as well, but that's all I can think of off the top of my head. You make that roll, and this again is where I'm going to use the margin of success and margin of failure. So that PSR, you note down the margin of success or margin of failure that you either passed or failed by. And that becomes a modifier to the artillery team doing a gunnery skill check immediately. They're checking with their gunnery skill to see how well they can take the GPS, weather, location data that you've sent them and turn it into useful information for their gunners to train in the actual gun, right? So you make an immediate gunnery skill check. And a quick note on force building, I would make the scout units buy their artillery. I'd definitely make that part of the BV, right? We're going to do a little bit of an interesting thing with the deployment for the attacking force, the assault force, but we'll get to that in a minute. But I would definitely make these guys buy their artillery. So they'll have to go through and set up what artillery pieces they want and how skilled they want them to be, and then reconcile that with the fact that they still have to have scouts to go out on the battlefield and do this stuff. So that's well worth it, I reckon. You use the margin of success or margin of failure of that piloting skill check from the scout, and if it's a failure, it goes as a plus to their gunnery skill for the artillery piece. If it's a success, it goes as a minus. And then I guess you could modify it for range or something like that, I don't know. But if they make that check, if they pass that gunnery skill check, then they can start taking shots, right? I would not set your artillery up more than, say, 2 or 3 turns flight time. But you could, if you're doing a follow-on, like if this is a follow-on thing and the scouts fail, then your artillery is in danger, the closer you put it, right? So if you have it further back, it's safer. If you get it closer, you'll be able to shoot quicker, but it'll be more in danger if you fail. Okay, so again, that's something you could maybe put in there as an incentive for the scouts to get it, like, this is what I want to do, but that's going to put me into, maybe I can, it's another little one of those things that you have to figure out. So what you could do is then require actual spotted fire from those artillery pieces to those locations in order to ensure that it's zeroed in. So what I mean is the scouts got into the location, they've done their PSR, their success or failure has modified a gunnery check by the artillery piece, and then if the artillery piece passes their gunnery check, they can start firing straight away in the next artillery phase, right? So they fire in the next phase. The scout obviously moves, but keeps line of sight on that location. As long as they can get line of sight in one shape or form on that location, then you can take the shots, right? You do a gunnery skill check. Now, you could insist on a margin of success and margin of failure for their original gunnery skill check to modify this gunnery skill check. See how you can ramp this up so quick? But you do a gunnery skill check with the spotter, and I would say you have to get at least 2 shots on target, right? If you're modifying for margin of success and failure, then you're probably going to want to succeed or try again. Just keep trying that original loop again until you get a good solid modifier. Then take a couple of shots 2 turns in a row, and when they land, you're making a normal gunnery skill check modified for that original gunnery skill check. Do you see what I mean? So let's go through it step by step, Tarron, because you're talking crap at people. Your scout gets onto a point. You've marked the points down. One of your scouts gets on one of those points, right? He contacts an artillery piece back at base. He makes a piloting skill check modified for all of the things that he's done that turn. And he has either a modifier, a margin of success or a margin of failure. His margin of success, let's say he passes. Say he passes by 3 points, right? So his margin of success is translated into a -3 for the artillery piece to then make an immediate gunnery skill check at -3. If that artillery piece makes that gunnery skill check, let's say they pass it by 2, right? Then you note that down. You say, okay, artillery piece 1, -2, 0.1. So the artillery placement 0.1 that you put down on the ground that unit just stood on, you have a -2 with artillery piece 1, right? The very next turn, in the movement phase, your scout is going to want to move. He wants to get off that point, but he wants to still have line of sight to it. Or he will want a scout to have line of sight to it. Doesn't have to be the same one, but you want a scout to have line of sight to it, right? The artillery piece fires, and you've got a turn wait for the artillery shell to actually land. When the artillery shell is on the turn it's going to land, you make a gunnery skill check with that artillery piece at -2. If you pass, it hits. You have to do that twice, that fire and check. If you can do that twice, then it's zeroed in and you can hit it without worrying about it. You can just continuously fire at that spot and hit it every single time. And you can't do that until you've hit it twice. Okay? Right. So what I would then do is say, okay, victory points for you as the scout for zeroing in that artillery point, that firing zone, right? Now, the interesting thing that I thought was, well, the assault force isn't necessarily going to be there straight away, right? You don't want them necessarily to turn up straight away. So what I thought is maybe a staggered deployment, right? So take your assault force, and this can be secret. You don't have to tell people what you've taken, right? And part of the fun is not telling people what you've taken, but you have your assault force, you work out your speeds, you note down all of your maximum speed, so the highest movement point amount that a given unit can have. Anything with, say, 15 or higher in any of its movement allowances, right? If it's running, cruise, the highest thing, if its velocity is 15, doesn't matter, right? So if it's got a 15 move in any of its movement forms, then it can turn up on the first turn. If it's got, say, 14 or higher, 13 or higher, then it can turn up in 3 turns. 12 or higher, it can be there in 5 turns. 8 or higher, it can be there in, say, 8 turns. Right? And you work it out to, like, better than that, obviously. That's probably the vodka. So you'd have to, like, have a real serious think about this. But stagger it based on movement, and the assaulting force is allowed to slow their units down. Right? So they don't have to turn up on the first turn. Right? You don't necessarily want your dasher to run out on the first turn by itself. Right? You don't necessarily want your 2 warrior helicopters to turn up on the second turn by themselves. Stagger the deployment of the assaulting force based on their speed is the point, right? And that gives the scouts a certain amount of time to be able to get to the further away points that they've marked and actually get some shots coming from the artillery, right? So they're going to want to get as far forward as they can and get some shots in on those so they can zero them in. So victory points for locking in an artillery point. I don't know, 2, 4, 10, however you want to do it. Doesn't matter. Victory points for that, right? The other thing that I would say is that each time the artillery hits a pre-programmed point, or any point, and actually damages enemy units, you'd probably get another allowance of victory points. Probably less than zeroing it in, but you'd still get it. And then the assault force is getting points for destroying the scouts, for each artillery point that wasn't locked in, and if they can get their units off the board on the scout side. Right, so you're trying to push forward. You want to get through that valley. You want to get out the other side. This is a breakthrough thing. You want to chase that artillery down, and you want to destroy them before they can lock that valley down and make your main force go the long way. Right, and this is probably getting very involved, but hopefully you're keeping up. And hopefully I'm not talking too much trash. What I was then thinking is, well, you've got your scouts all coming on in the first turn. They're racing for these points. The artillery's going to start making checks. You're going to start firing things down. You're going to be trying desperately to get those things locked in so that you can get artillery onto things that are incoming. What about if, once you've done that, or you've got a point locked in, you've managed to land 2 hits on target, we put a variant of the correction mechanic for artillery. So what you can do is, when it's zeroed in, you can always hit that point. Even without a spotter, your artillery can always hit that point. Right? There's no check, there's no nothing. You don't need a spotter, you don't need line of sight, nothing. Right? There's nothing else necessary. You've locked it in, you can shoot it. Right? What if you still have a scout in the area and you think, oh, well, I mean, they're pretty slow, they're coming forward, but I want to try and hit them before they get to those pre-programmed points. If you have a unit that can see the 2 locations, the point where you've zeroed in and the point where you actually want it to land, then you can adjust fire. So your scout has to have line of sight on both the original point and the point where you want it to be in the turn that you fire it and in the turn that it comes in. You could make it one or the other, and I wouldn't really be worried. You could make it both, and like I say, that just ups the challenge, because you could, like, the turn it's fired, you could be spotting them and like radio in, or up 17, fire for effect sort of thing, and then run away and then come back and see how it works sort of thing. You know, that's what I was thinking. Or you could just say, well, you only have to be there on the turn it comes in, or you only have to be in there on the turn that they fire it. Depends how you want to play it. But then I would say on the turn it comes in, you have to make an actual gunnery skill check, and you get a +1 to that check to hit. So it'd be a standard gunnery skill, whatever your gunnery skill is, but it would be +1 for every hex you've moved it away. So you could say, okay, I want you to hit point number 2, but I want it to be 3 hexes further to the top, right, further north, we'll say, right? So you'd fire that, you'd have to have a spotter on it, and then when it comes in, on the turn it comes in, again, you could have a spotter on it, but it would be fired, and you would have a gunnery skill check for that artillery piece at +3, or pieces. You can always fire multiples, obviously. Yeah, I think that would be kind of cool. Again, you'd have the victory points for the attacker, the assault force, B for destroying scouts, for every point that wasn't locked in, and for getting intact units or reasonably intact units past. And that's where the problem lies, is if they're having to fight their way through interlocking fields of continuous artillery barrages, they're probably not going to be able to get many people through intact. And then as your next mission, if you are doing connected missions, if the assault force manages a breakthrough, then you can have that mission where you chase down the artillery. Assuming you've put it close enough that you get good flight times, and not so far away that you're actually at the defensive line, right? If the scout wins this one, then they've zeroed all of these points in. They've maybe even taken a couple of the advanced assault units out with this artillery. The assault force has realised it's got no chance of getting through that valley, and they've had to go around. So they're